It's time for me to rank all the films I've seen that came out in 2002. We've got a whopping 21 films to get through. Welcome to my ranking of films that came out in 2002, and it's a really good one today. This is possibly one of the best episodes of this series so far, at least in terms of the consistency of quality. I would say from 19th all the way to first. The bottom two films let the side down a little bit, but for the most part, this is going to be a really good video today. I'm looking forward to it. Before we get into it though, a quick reminder that the top two films today will go through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. But for now, let's concentrate on 2002, and we'll start with the film that I consider to be the worst that I've personally seen from this particular year. I'm just going to come out and say it, I do suffer somewhat from arachnophobia. I've also got that phobia of great heights. I just can't remember what the word for that is. It's a wonder to me, actually, that I've actually seen Eight-Legged Freaks and that older spider film that was actually called Arachnophobia. That came out around about 1990. Now, the reason why I watched Arachnophobia was just because I was bored. There wasn't really much to do when I was 9, 10 years old. Eight-Legged Freaks I saw around at a friend's house a long, long time ago. He put it on and I sat through it. I didn't complain or make a fuss or freak out, but it was very much an experience for me to just get through rather than enjoy. So yeah, this film's not for me at all. I didn't find Eight-Legged Freaks as freaky as Arachnophobia because the spiders in this film are blown up to ridiculous proportions. They don't feel like real spiders, sort of. But yeah, I could accept that this is an alright film if you don't suffer from what I suffer from, so it's been a little bit unlucky to come bottom today. I'm going to talk about Die Another Day another day because I'm getting very close now to doing my up-to-date James Bond ranking. So since September, when No Time to Die came out, I have been gradually re-watching all the Bond films just so that when I eventually do my ranking, all the films will be really fresh in my mind. Last night I watched Skyfall, so I've only got Spectre and a rewatch of No Time to Die to go, and then I'll be ready. So I'm hoping to sort of do that video maybe a month from now. I want to do Batman first, and then I'm going to tackle Bond. In terms of Die Another Day, though, as you can probably gauge by the fact that it's only come 20th out of 21 films today, and I did say that the bottom two films were pretty bad in my mind today, don't expect it to do very well when I eventually do my Bond rankings. This is a thriller set in a night school about a guy who has a one-night stand with a girl. I think they have sex in a swimming pool, hence the title of the film. But when he rejects her the following day, I think she goes all psychotic and starts stalking him and doing other nasty stuff. So it's kind of like a Fatal Attraction type setup, I guess, but in a school. It's pretty good. We're into the good films now, you know, 19 through 1, all very good from this point onwards. It's a very Netflixy type of film, I'd say. You know, it will help you pass 90 minutes of a very slow-moving evening, but I wouldn't buy it or spend money on it sort of thing. But yeah, it's all right. This is a film about a guy who, he sleeps around a lot, but it doesn't really give him that much satisfaction in the aftermath, so he sets himself a challenge to not have sex with anybody for 40 days. He's not even allowed to masturbate during this time. Those are the rules that he's setting for himself. So it's like a spiritual journey he's going on to try and just live his life without thinking about sex for a little while at least. But the trouble is, people find out that he's doing this challenge, people at his work and in the local town. So suddenly there are like women throwing themselves at him from all angles, trying to be the one who makes him break his streak of days. And there's also this girl he meets during this time who he really likes, like more than any other girl he's ever met. So he's going on dates with her, but trying not to sleep with her, even though she would absolutely be up for that. This isn't a film that will have you rolling around, you know, in stitches from laughter, but it's got quite a few amusing setups. It's a really cool story. It's very unique. I think I had it on DVD like way back in the day, but I don't anymore. Possibly I lost it during one of my various house moves that I've done over the years. It seems to be an unwritten rule that whenever you move house and you have a big DVD collection, 10% of those DVDs magically just disappear by the time that you're moved into your new house, and it's usually 10%, the worst 10%, if you see what I mean. So probably there's some conscious choice in it. I just don't personally remember chucking stuff out when I'm moving house. But yeah, at some point my DVD for this vanished. But I'm not bothered. It's not a film that I ever go back to. But I do remember it being quite funny. This is a Tom Hanks-led gangster film. He plays a kind of low-level enforcer. One day, his son witnesses something he wasn't supposed to see, so Hanks has to grab him, go on the run, at which point his former employers send a hitman after him, played by Jude Law. So it becomes a kind of chase movie at this point. I'd say that it's a stylish, classy film rather than an exciting one. Tom Hanks plays a very reserved sort of man. It's an unusually quiet part for Hanks, I'd say, but the film is also noticeable for the fact that Daniel Craig plays one of the lesser villains in it. And this was the film that convinced me that Craig would make a great Bond, because even though he hasn't got that many scenes, there's this one moment where he's just lying in a bathtub, I think, smoking a cigarette, and he looks so suave that, yeah, I remember thinking at the time, yeah, this guy could absolutely play James Bond. But in terms of the film as a whole, it's fading from memory a little bit now, but I would say it's worth at least one watch if you're into sort of gangster films, thriller films. This is a Christopher Nolan thriller about a cop played by Al Pacino who's trying to capture a bad guy played by Robin Williams, although he doesn't actually realise it's Williams until the last 10 minutes, I think. It's set somewhere like Iceland, and the quirk of the film is the fact that it's never nighttime wherever this place is. It's like completely daylight, 24 hours a day. And Al Pacino can't cope with this. He can't get sleep, so he's constantly running around trying to solve murders with bags under his eyes. And he's also struggling to get over something from his past as well. So this is kind of like a psychological thriller. It's by Christopher Nolan. He doesn't do bad films, you know. And this might have scored higher today, actually, but for the fact that I've only seen it once, and it was donkeys years ago. David Beckham is not actually in this movie. I think he gets like a 1 second cameo where you can just see him at an airport wearing some sunglasses and looking suave. But just his name being in the title of this film definitely would have put extra bums on cinema seats, because he was the darling of British sport back in 2002. But this film is actually about women's football and the idea of, can they bend it like Beckham, because he was famous for his curling crosses. So in the story for this, we've got an Indian girl who joins this professional, semi-professional team. I can't remember, but it's a pretty good side because they go on tours of Germany. But the family of this girl expect her to follow a more traditional Indian path and get married really early and not play sports. So she kind of rebels against them. And she's also quickly involved in a romance with the manager of her team, which is not going to impress her best friend on the team, who also fancies the manager. So there's a lot going on. It's very, very funny. I like the main girl in this, and she didn't really do a whole lot after Bend It Like Beckham. I remember seeing her in a very small part in something else about 15 years after this film and thinking, wow, I recognise you. What happened to your career? Keira Knightley, on the other hand, who plays the lesser part, went on to like complete megastardom. Now, I know Pirates of the Caribbean came out 2003, which is a year after this, so maybe it was that film that launched Keira Knightley, because Bend It Like Beckham wouldn't have been enough on its own to sort of propel somebody into a big Hollywood career. But I like the main girl in this. I like her character. I like the character of her sister, who is somebody taking the more straight-laced path into Indian marriage. They could have made that person a really uppity, snobby character who doesn't like her sister playing football, but they don't. They just make her this really cool chick who's like really funny anytime she's on screen. So I quite like this movie. I actually had it on DVD at one point, and I liked it enough to sort of sit there and watch some of the features as well. So if you're into football, give it a shot. Oh, and there's a really funny ending to this. So you get one of those typical sports film type endings where the main girl scores the winning goal in like the last minute. She does so with a curling free kick, you know, just like David Beckham, but the dive of the goalkeeper is hilarious. This girl does this really pathetic kind of to try and get the ball. And me and a friend who watched this film together, we laughed so much at this. We rewound the tape like 4 times. So check that out if you do watch the film. One of Schwarzenegger's last films before he went off to do his stint as the governor of California, and probably one of his least known, I would say. And I imagine the reason for that is because in this film, he doesn't tool up and go shooting 50, 60 guys. You know, he plays a fireman in this. And I think at the start of the film, he loses his family or his wife to a terrorist attack. So he goes to Colombia to try and hunt down the man responsible. But because he's just a regular guy, he doesn't have military training. He has to be really stealthy about it. And I think the idea is that he's just going to try and sneak in and kill this one guy. He's not going to just lay waste to Colombia. So Schwarzenegger definitely dialing down on the normal tendency of his to turn his films into a bit of a shoot 'em up. But it's a good absorbing thriller. It's got some twists in it. The bad guy is absolutely vicious and also a very clever man as well. So yeah, this film kept me guessing and on my toes all the way up to the very end. It's absolutely worth a watch if you can get over the fact that it's not going to end up being Commando Part 2. If you don't know, I am one of the world's biggest Halloween Resurrection fans, seriously, and I'm still not putting it in my top 10 today, but if you want to hear me go against the grain of popular opinion on this, then check out my review of Halloween Resurrection. It's in my Halloween playlist. I speak very positively about the film. I only gave it like 3 out of 5 or 3.5 out of 5 from memory. I mean, I'm not completely insane. I'm not saying it's a masterpiece or anything. It does have its issues, but I've always really liked the film. I like the characters. I like the Myers house. It has a good sense of humour, this. I mean, I know Halloween's not meant to be like a black comedy or anything, but this is like the 8th film in the franchise. I don't mind something different by that point. So, yeah, I'm not going to criticise Halloween Resurrection at all today. I think it's a way more enjoyable film than the one that came before it, Halloween H2O, which is one of my least favourites in the series. So this is the second Harry Potter film, and I've got it 12th. I had The Philosopher's Stone coming 10th in my 2001 ranking, so a sign of diminishing returns already. Actually, Chamber of Secrets might be my favourite Harry Potter film. I like all of the first 3 a lot, and I think from the 4th one onwards, it just starts to go down a bit for me. In terms of the books, I think Chamber of Secrets is actually the worst. I've read all of the books apart from the last one, bizarrely. I just really started to lose interest towards the end. The second book feels really samey when compared to the first book, but I think the second film did a much better job of making itself different from the first film. It's possibly just a visual thing, because in this film, the flying car sequence really comes to life, and the ending with the giant snake through the tunnels, I mean, that's the stuff of nightmares. I would have been scared shitless by that if I was like a 10-year-old person watching this film. So, yeah, this is definitely one of the better films, and also probably one of the last times that the novel was adapted in a really serious way. From the third film onwards, they really started to chop stuff left, right, and centre. This film's got one of my favourite Harry Potter characters of all time, which is Gilderoy Lockhart. He's just absolutely hilarious. I wish he had been in more of these films. Yes, I'm the winner of the Witches Weekly Smile Award for the 7th year running. Possibly the weakest of the Anthony Hopkins Hannibal films, although having said that, I've not seen any of the ones that don't have him in. I've not seen Manhunter, and I've not seen Hannibal Rising. The biggest problem with this one is that it's a prequel, so we know it has to cycle back around to the beginning of Silence of the Lambs. We know that Hannibal's not going to get out of the asylum at any point. I'm not the biggest Edward Norton fan either. His acting is very hit and miss for me. I'm not the biggest fan of his style of delivery, and it does bug me in a lot of the films that he's in. The only time I've really enjoyed one of his performances was in The Incredible Hulk, bizarrely. The secondary villain that we get here, played by Ralph Fiennes, I think, which is weird to look back on now after seeing him as M in the Bond films for quite a few years. There's enough quirks with this villain to sort of keep him interesting all the way through the film. Philip Seymour Hoffman is one of his victims at one point, which is kind of weird. It's probably a better film than I remember, actually. It's certainly well made, well scripted. Come to think of it, I've not seen any of these for quite a few years, so it wouldn't be the worst idea for me to do a ranking of the Hannibal films or some reviews, because some of them I've not seen in ages and I do like them, especially the first 2, Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal, and some of them, like I've said, I've not even seen. So into the top 10 we go with Cube 2 Hypercube. I'm not going to explain the plot of the first film to you. you've either seen it or you haven't. But whereas the traps in that first film were more practical, down to earth, in the second film they are definitely more sci-fi, futuristic, more out there. I mean, there's traps in this film based around gravity and time vortexes and time bending, all sorts of weird stuff. The one that I most remember is the couple who go into a room and they start to have sex, but they don't realise that they're in a passage of time trap kind of thing. So during intercourse, they're getting older and they don't even realise it, to the point that they literally die of old age in the middle of sex. It sounds weird, and you don't fully see it, I don't think, but there's lots of weird ideas in this film, and mostly they're very good. This is a very high quality sequel, I think. It's only a fraction below the first film. It's the third film in this franchise where the quality really goes. But if you've seen the first Cube film and you can appreciate just how good that film was, then absolutely check out Cube 2. It's decent. I watched this one quite recently and covered it on the channel, sort of, with my Bourne rankings video, so I do feel a little bit kind of all talked out at the moment when it comes to all things Bourne and the Bourne identity. The novel is one of my favourite books of all time. This movie is not one of my favourite movies of all time, but it's certainly a really great thriller from the noughties. You won't find much that was better from that decade, although it's not my favourite Bourne film. That accolade will go to the Bourne supremacy all day long. Martin Scorsese's period piece gangster film starring Leonardo DiCaprio going after Daniel Day-Lewis. Day-Lewis probably steals the show in this film, to be fair. Cameron Diaz is in there as well, just to add a bit of glamour, a bit of spice. Liam Neeson has some early scenes. There are a few other actors who you'll probably recognise, if not necessarily be able to name. It's a really good cast. It's not necessarily a time and place in history that I'm massively interested in, but you can't help getting swept away by just how well crafted this film is. It's really enjoyable. It all builds up to a duel at the end between DiCaprio and Day-Lewis, which is sort of interrupted by the army because there's rioting going on for some unrelated reason. Reminds me a little bit of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly in that regard. And I love the way that this film cuts to credits. We sort of get a shot of a graveyard, and in the background you can see New York, and then it just speeds up 200 years to get you up to the present day. So there's a lot to enjoy in this film. It's probably one of my favourite Scorsese films, actually, because I'm not massively into his bigger hits like Goodfellas and Mean Streets. And I think I've got Gangs of New York on DVD. I'll have to check that out. I'm sure I do. This film looks a little bit dated now because the special effects and the CGI are not quite what Marvel are able to do with the more modern Spider-Man films. But this is still really enjoyable. Sam Raimi did an incredible job with this original Spider-Man trilogy. I even quite like the third film, which sometimes gets some derision from fans. The weird thing about me and Spider-Man is that Tobey Maguire is probably still my favourite Spider-Man, and I don't say that out of some kind of sentimentality for the old days, because I only started watching these like just a few years ago. I didn't watch them when they first came out. I'd also say that Kirsten Dunst is my favourite of all of Spider-Man's love interests. So the two main characters in the 2002 Spider-Man, my favourite out of the entire franchise, but I probably prefer the Marvel movies as movies, if you see what I mean. So it's a bit of a trade-off for me. But I don't think there's been a bad Spider-Man movie, like, ever. I mean, sometimes I'll just randomly throw one of these on a Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, if I'm not doing anything. They're not really films I'd watch at night. They're weekend afternoon movies for me, but I always enjoy them. So I'm happy to put Spider-Man in my top 10 today. And I think as we go through the rest of the Spider-Man films in these yearly rankings videos, I think most of them are going to do quite well. One of the least popular Star Wars films, but I've always quite liked it personally. I've seen it 3 or 4 times, always had fun. The only bad thing about this film is the romance between Padme and Anakin, which is painful to sit through. I do feel sorry for Natalie Portman in this film. Her acting level is so far above that of the other guy. And the words that these two are having to come out with are just embarrassing. The stuff to do with sand, and thankfully it only goes on for like 2, 3, 4 scenes, and then you can enjoy the rest of the movie, but it is a blight on it. But there are so many great action sequences in this, you know. This is the one where Obi-Wan goes to the island, and it's full of like, it's got like a robot factory or something, and there's like a clone of Boba Fett running around. And then there's this whole sequence with like a sports arena near the end with all these battles going on that they're forced to do. And probably my favourite part of the movie is when Anakin and Obi-Wan go to this city at night time, and these buildings are just like ridiculously high. They're like 500 stories or something, and there's like a car chase going on really high up. I could name things all the way throughout Star Wars Episode 2 which make it well worth watching, and like I said, I've seen it quite a few times. I will always defend the prequels. The horror film that put Eli Roth on the map, possibly. This was a really random purchase for me back in the day. I didn't know much about the film at all. I was just randomly shopping, buying DVDs on the fly, as I was prone to do back then, and somehow I came across this gem. So it's about 4 characters who go and stay in a cabin in the woods, but it's right in the middle of Hicksville where they're staying. I mean, all the locals have got like IQs of about 60. They're really weird and dangerous as well. Even more dangerous, though, is the fact that the local water is somehow polluted and toxic. So the main characters in this are fighting danger on 2 fronts, but it's really cool. It's quite gory. It's very funny as well. There's this random weird cop who turns up, who ended up being such a popular character that they brought him back for Cabin Fever 2, even though none of the other characters come back, mainly because pretty much most of them die. But this is a really, really cool film. If you're into horror films and you've never seen this, absolutely put it on your bucket list. Was this the birth of the fast-moving zombie film? I don't know, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it was probably the first of that kind of film that I personally saw. Although this film is probably most famous for a shot very early on in the film where Cillian Murphy turns around in his hospital gear, and behind him you can see like Westminster and London just completely deserted. If you've ever been to London, you'll understand why this is just such a weird thing to see in film. So obviously this is a zombie film that takes place in England, and just like The Walking Dead actually, we get a main protagonist here who is hospitalised at the time that the outbreak begins, and then he wakes up a month later and he's kind of like, oh, what happened? Where did everybody go? Come to think of it, I wonder what came first. Kirkman doing this in the Walking Dead comics or Danny Boyle doing it in 28 Days Later. The two can't have been that far removed from each other in terms of when they first came out in the noughties. So I don't know, somebody must have copied somebody in this, surely. But anyway, this is a really hard to predict film. It's really enjoyable. It's got a great villain performance from Christopher Eccleston, a famous British actor, and someone else who's in this as well is, I can't think of her name, but she plays Moneypenny in the more modern Daniel Craig, James Bond films. This was probably her breakout film. She was probably only about 21, 22 when she did this, so she's in this as well. But this is one of the great modern-day zombie films for me. Back-to-back zombie films, huzzah! When Resident Evil and 28 Days Later first came out, I probably would have said that 28 Days Later was my favourite of the two, but over time I've started to really build an appreciation of Paul W. Anderson's first Resi film. I do think it's hugely underrated. It is hard to get into at first when you go into it with the expectation that it's going to be like the early video games, and it's not. But I really like it now, and it's very high on my Resident Evil rankings actually, which I did only recently, so I'm not going to talk too much about this film today because I've done this whole review series for Resi, and similar to the way I feel about Bourne at the moment, I'm all talked out on the subject, so I'm going to leave it here. It is a very good film in my opinion, hence why it's come third today, but it's now time to go into the top 2 and find out which films are going to be progressing to the grand final. So let's begin with this one. So for the second consecutive yearly rankings video, a Lord of the Rings film has managed to get into second spot. It's yet to win one of these rankings though, but for pure consistency, I mean, we've got 2 Lord of the Rings films going through to the grand final now. This second film has a different style to the first one. In the first one, we mainly focus on one continuous journey. This time around, we've got different sets of characters in different locations. But this is what Tolkien did at this point of his book, though, so you've kind of got to be faithful to that. The action in the Two Towers mainly builds towards this epic final battle at somewhere called Hell's Keep, Hell's Deep, I can't remember, but it's a fantastic battle. It's a little bit too one-sided in the favour of the aggressors. I would have preferred it if the people defending the keep had done so on their own accord at the end, rather than have to be rescued by a Deus Ex Machina, but it's a small complaint. On the whole, this is I mean, if you watch the extended version of this, it's like 3.5 hours of just amazing Lord of the Rings action. It's right up my street, and I'm pretty sure this is the one where Gollum comes into it, my favourite Lord of the Rings character of all time, whether in the books or the films. So yeah, Two Towers is great, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Amazon do with their new Lord of the Rings TV show, which I think is coming out later this year. I'm really looking forward to that. I believe they've spent a hell of a lot of money on it, so it should be good. But for now, let's move past the Two Towers and find out what film managed to beat this into the #1 spot. Bit of a surprise. To be honest, I was surprised. When I was writing these down and putting the films in the order that I wanted them, it suddenly dawned on me, The Ring's going to be #1 for 2002. I absolutely love The Ring. Now, it is a remake of a Japanese film which came out in 2000, and which one you prefer out of the two will probably depend on which one you watch first. For me, the first one I saw was the American version, so that's the one that I love. I didn't know an awful lot about it going in, so everything that happens in the film was a surprise to me, and therefore it was really effective. I thought it was genuinely really, really creepy all the way through. I did try and watch The Ring 2 once, but I didn't enjoy it, but I think I need to try that one again because I was absolutely drunk as a skunk at the time. Ring films are maybe not the best to watch when you come back from the pub and you've had like 3, 4, 5 pints. What you want to watch in that situation, something like Friday the 13th Part 3 or Piranha 3D, not The Ring or The Ring 2. So I will try The Ring 2 again at some point. Maybe I'll even review the entire American trilogy of The Ring as well when I get around to it, because I have reviewed the Japanese version way back at the start of the channel. I've never touched the American version, the one I really love, therefore, in terms of a review. So maybe for the future, but for now, I will just declare this as my favourite film from 2002, and I guess that concludes the video. There is one more question left to ask, though. Quite a few, actually. I'm just going to read these out. If you've stuck with me this far through the video, I appreciate that you might want to get off. So, We Were Soldiers, Panic Room, The Scorpion King, Minority Report, Transporter, and Dog Soldiers. Quite a lot of quite well-known films in there, so I may have to check some of those out at a future time. But for now, let me just recap. We have Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and The Ring, the American version, going through to the grand final of 100 films. I'll be back soon with the rankings for 2003. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.